Well, I set out to try to get a tremendous speaker for Memorial Day every year. And I called up Chuck Larson. I asked if he knew of anyone I could get. He said, well, let me work a few days on this. And then he called me back. And he told me about Jim Felker. When I read his resume, I don't know about you, but my heart was heavy. He was in Vietnam, he won 2 Purple Hearts. He won many distinguished medals. But yet he served. Above all that, he served. And I want to say thank you for your service, first of all. And I'm honored to have you behind the pulpit of First Baptist, Jim Felker.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Pastor, for inviting my wife Karen and me to worship you and your congregation this morning. It is a pleasure for us to be here this Sunday morning for Memorial Day and to be given the opportunity to share a story with you. It's a story about how God worked in my life to provide healing in a way that I would never have imagined. It's a story that begins in a tiny hamlet near Da Nang, South Vietnam, then moves to a Veterans Day ceremony in Washington, D.C., then to a cemetery in Richmond, Indiana, and finally to a home on a rural acreage in Eaton, Ohio. I was a 17-year-old boy from Syracuse, New York in August 1963 when I, like many others, enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps. As an offspring of the greatest generation, I was inspired to do so by the remarks of our President, John F. Kennedy, who had challenged all Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask rather what you can do for your country. Not quite 3 years later, I was a member of the 1st Battalion, 9th Marine Regiment. On Friday morning, June the 10th, 1966, my platoon was operating in Quang Nam Province, south of Da Nang. Moving ahead of me in a tiny hamlet on a muddy path near a cluster of thatched huts was a fellow Marine who I had really connected with and liked. His name, Terry Lee Wiles. Often, he shared stories with me about his family and hometown of Richmond, Indiana. Stepping slowly in the 90-plus degree heat, I nervously tightened my grip on the M14 rifle I carried. As I glanced quickly to my left and back to my right, a sharp, loud explosion shattered the late morning silence, leaving me stunned and shocked. Recoiling, I immediately moved in the direction of the blast, knowing that something was terribly wrong. What I witnessed seemed so surreal. My friend's life was ended, and there was nothing I could do. The next 48 hours seemed like an eternity and involved a series of hostile contacts with elements of a North Vietnamese Army battalion. 2 days later, I sustained a gunshot wound in the chest. Drifting in and out of consciousness, gripped by fear and feelings of panic, I felt certain I would soon meet my maker. I was loaded on a helicopter and in a few days evacuated to a hospital in the Philippines. God had spared my life. How many times would I replay it all in my mind in the 16 years that followed? The look on Terry's face, the sickening sounds, the hideously mangled rifle barrel, as if there was something I could do to change it all. Why him and not me, I asked myself. In the years that ensued, I married, had 2 children, earned a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling psychology from the University of Iowa, and divorced. Even though I had gone through the motions of moving on with my life, I was always bothered by my experiences in Vietnam. I was consumed by feelings of guilt and anger. I sought out fellowship of other Vietnam veterans who I felt understood what I was experiencing. On Veterans Day, November the 11th, 1982, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, located in Washington, D.C., was dedicated. I knew I had to be there, as did several other members of the Vietnam Veteran Support Group I belonged to. So, we headed to Washington together in a borrowed motorhome. Following the ceremony, and with the sound of taps echoing across the National Mall, I searched panel 8E for a name. Noticing my own reflection in the black marble, my eyes raced down to line 32 and fixed on a name. Wiles Terry Lee. At that moment, I knew I had to find Terry's grave, say goodbye, and put my feelings to rest. Back in Cedar Rapids, during one of our Saturday morning support group meetings, I shared with others my decision to go to Richmond, Indiana, and to find Terry's grave. I had gained much from attending these meetings and sharing thoughts and feelings with other divorced Vietnam veterans. One member said he would help me find Terry's grave. He was true to his word. In less than 2 weeks, a letter showed up in my mailbox from the city clerk, Richmond, Indiana, providing me with the information I needed. I knew when I would go and the items I would place on Terry's grave. Exactly 17 years after Terry's death, on June the 10th, 1983, I, along with my 2 small children, arrived in Richmond, Indiana, and stood in front of a granite stone in Earlham Cemetery. Many thoughts and memories passed through my mind as I said my goodbye to Terry. I left an American flag, flowers, a brief note with my name and address wrapped in a plastic bag. The healing had begun. Upon returning to Cedar Rapids 2 weeks later, much to my surprise, a letter had arrived for me from Terry's parents, Bud and Josie Wiles. They thanked me for remembering their son. I wrote back. After corresponding for a year, Bud and Josie invited me to visit their home in Eaton, Ohio. I knew accepting this invitation was a risk, but one I had to take. I had heard of other such visits under similar circumstances not turning out well.